Cool. Looks like we're just connecting in. Awesome. Welcome back to UX Live from the previous talk. Massive thanks to Jurgen there. And just a quick word about Sketch as well, who are one of our sponsors. Sketch gives you all the tools you need for a truly collaborative design process, from early ideas to pixel perfect artwork, playable prototypes, and developer handoff. It all starts here with Sketch. You can also join the wonderful Sketch team within their booth area during the networking breaks today and tomorrow. They're happy to answer any of your product related questions. Now, with that said about Sketch, please drop some emojis on screen. Let's see some emojis go. Yeah, there you go. And or just clap out loud at home and join me in welcoming our next amazing speaker, Natalie Dunbar, to the UX Live stage. Hey, Natalie.
Hello. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for having me here today. I'm excited to share some of my passions with you about things that may not seem like they're related, but hopefully I'll make the point as we go along.
Awesome. I'll leave it to you. Have a
All
great one.
right. So as we start, you might be wondering why yoga and why UX and why content strategy. Well, in addition to my day job, working at Walmart in our design team as a UX focused content strategist, I also teach part time yoga. I teach private yoga and I teach it, I specialize in making it accessible for all shapes, sizes, and abilities. So, just the obligatory slide about who I am and where I've come from. I've been in Marcom. I've been a media publications writer. I've been a journalist, managing editor, um, editorial producer, all of the things in the digital space, and a soon-to-be author. I'll share about that towards the end. But I've worked in a lot of highly regulated spaces, from telecom to healthcare to government. So these are just like some of the clients that I've worked with and brands that I've worked with here in the States. Um, when I'm teaching yoga, though, let's talk about that for a second. I want to frame how I start my session. I start by sharing an intention for our time together. So I usually read a quote or a mantra, kind of as an overarching theme. And then I invite people to create a more personalized intention to keep in mind throughout the practice. So for today, our intention is that, like yoga, digital spaces should be for every body. Now, note that it says every space body. That's two words. And that's on purpose because I don't want to lump everybody together, but I want to be able to start to focus on seeing the uniqueness in each individual, in each body that comes to the mat or comes to our digital experiences. So, this is going to be our intention throughout our time together. It's our value proposition and North Star. So, here's how we're going to approach this intention setting together. So, we're going to use yoga as a metaphor and specifically accessible yoga. And we're going to explore how we can create and support experiences that are accessible, safe, and welcoming. So, we're going to talk about what it means to hold space. We're going to talk about the importance of inquiry and how it relates to wayfinding. We're going to look at sequencing and how that goes hand in hand with content hierarchy and the hierarchy of the user experiences that we create. We're going to consider how to use variations to enhance inclusion. And lastly, we're going to look at how non attachment or letting go of old beliefs and notions can help us to create spaces that are accessible, diverse, and inclusive. And so, what exactly do we mean by yoga accessibility? So, we have the Americans with Disabilities Act in the States, and it's meant to ensure that all people have physical access to public spaces. But the concept of accessibility that we're going to talk about today goes beyond physical accessibility. So, by way of a backstory, I completed my teacher training in 2015. I live in the greater Los Angeles area where there's literally yoga studios on nearly every corner. But I chose to complete my training with the founder of Curvy Yoga in Nashville, Tennessee. I had started my practice about 3 years before um, as a way to combat some of the injuries that I was getting after 6 years of coaching and training for marathons. So after having repeated negative experience in regular yoga studios where someone in my stature was told, walking into a beginner's yoga class, this is going to be hard, right? I wanted to be the curvy yoga teacher that I wanted to see. I wanted to be representative of the bodies that are welcome in a studio on a yoga mat. And I also wanted to bring yoga to the unpracticed. So for those for who myriad reasons, whether it be financial exclusion or lack of proximity to a studio, for whatever reason, they don't have access to yoga. So when I stumbled upon Accessible Yoga as an organization, I became an ambassador. So simply put, uh, Accessible Yoga is a nonprofit organization whose mission is to remove all barriers of access or to access for yoga for all. And just like yoga, all people deserve equal access to information spaces. So I love this quote about how the mission of AY is to remove barriers. So the barriers spoken of here are not just physical barriers. They can be emotional. As I said earlier, they can be financial, they can be proximal, meaning that there's no places or spaces to practice yoga within a reasonable radius or within a reasonable financial amount that people can access or get to. So we've scratched the surface just a little bit about yoga accessibility, and hopefully we're still aligned on our intention. So how might we take what we know about accessible yoga, what we just talked about, and apply that to digital experiences and information spaces? So let's start our practice. So in much of the work that I've done, and I'm sure you've all encountered, there's a lot of talks about needs, aspirations, and hopes. We call them business goals and user needs and that sort of thing. And then we talk about challenges. Sometimes we talk about challenges in terms of like improving things like readability and usability and wayfinding. There's challenges for the differently abled that can be addressed by W3's accessibility standards. But what if we broadened our thinking and we started to look at challenges that are often faced by user groups that we might have unintentionally excluded from accessing our products or services? These challenges that are barriers to providing equal access beyond our personas and even beyond our current user base. In other words, sometimes the challenge is that we've left out an entire demographic, potential users and subscribers and customers, whatever you call the folks that you want to convert from curious to committed. Sometimes we unintentionally leave people out. And so returning to this concept of empathy, which I know has kind of been overused almost to the point of becoming trite, but I want you to stay with me just for a moment. This kind of empathy that we're talking about starts with creating a container, whether it be a yoga space or a digital experience or information space. We're talking about a space that we hold in order to be present with other people. So in this case, we're talking about our users. So this kind of empathy asks us to look at who came into the space, who's not present, who's not represented in the space that we've created. And it demands that we consider how we can invite and embrace differences beyond our current audiences. And so this is a quote from one of the teachers that I've studied with, Diane Bondi. She's from Canada. She's an amazing social justice warrior, in addition to be a very powerful and wonderful yoga teacher. And this quote stuck with me. If you grasp nothing else, one of the things that she says here is that in her early yoga studio experiences, she did not see herself represented. And that was because she was different. She was a woman of color in a larger body. And the result of that is that she felt left out. And so, thinking of that quote, yoga calls us to inner observation, and that observation requires inquiry. So, here's a list of questions that I learned from my other teacher, the founder of Curvy Yoga. In the context of yoga, she talks about how we're called to that inner observation to approach our practice and by extension our bodies with curiosity and without judgment. In that same way that we inquire within as we begin a yoga practice, we can do the same thing as we start to develop and content and in support of products and features and experiences. So we can become that curious user. We can see how we've created what we've created stacks up against heuristics and whether or not we're giving the user what they need without unnecessary impediment. And moreover, by putting ourselves in the user's shoes, we can begin to see which users' needs are not being considered or met. And we can think about how we can ensure that they're represented in this experience that we're creating as well. And so when I teach yoga, I teach a pose to the body that I'm working with. I don't teach that pose or that body to conform to the pose. And that should be the same for our content within our user experiences and the entire experience. So content should work for our users. And yes, it should work for the business or organization too. But the user should not have to find workarounds or work to find the content or understand the message or value of what it is that we're bringing to them. Whether it's yoga or digital experiences, in both situations, the goal is to have the end benefit, whether it's pose or content, be the same for all users. And so when yoga sequences, teachers will often start with a theme. And they'll add poses to help yogis maintain awareness of what came before. So we can use a similar experience and approach to ensure that every user's experience benefits from whatever we're creating. So just like the yoga teacher that helps students maintain awareness of what came before, and we can do the same thing in our work. We can use structure and flow to build content experiences that are engaging. And we use hierarchy when we create content on a screen or on a web page or within any kind of digital experience, using that hierarchy. So not only do people know where they came from, they have a good sense of where they want to go next within the flow. And so if you want or need to think in terms of ROI, return on investment, and you're wondering how all of this, accessibility talk plays within the realm of business, consider this quote from Writing is Designing authors Michael and Andy. And they talk about if potential users can't see themselves in the experiences that you're creating, then they're not going to use what you've built, and that can cost you revenue. And so when teaching a group of differently abled yogis, offering variations invites belonging. So instead of singling out those who are differently able by giving maybe only yoga props to them, everybody in the studio space gets props. And then everybody is given the choice to use them or not. We can invite that belonging, that same kind of belonging, with our digital experiences in the same way. I offer a few examples about ensuring that content avoids othering and that we use plain language so that people really understand what it is that we're trying to convey. Stay away from jargon and internal speak. How we sometimes will have names for our products and services internally that don't make any sense to anyone who's on the other side of the experience that we've built. And so think for a moment about your brand, your product or service, and think about the content that you create to support the digital experiences of your brand, product, or service. So if you don't consider disability as a design constraint and instead think about what it can tell you about how to create spaces for a diverse user base, you flip it. You start to, instead of designing around something or reacting to it at the end, you start to incorporate in the beginning how to accommodate a more diverse user base. And so I saved this concept for last about non-attachment because it's a beautiful segue into going within, whether it's with your team or just with yourself. But you want to roll up your sleeves and start doing the work of creating safe and inclusive spaces. So in yoga, non-attachment invites us to let go of the way we think things are and to consider another perspective. And so we know that when we're creating content or, other elements for a digital experience, that it's vitally important to know your audience, especially when you're setting out to create content that's more diverse and inclusive. And just in case anyone needs to be reminded, knowing is not the same as assuming. We really want to move into that direction of knowing. And to do that, you might consider any preconceived notions that you might have, any biases that you might have. You want to begin to move beyond just diversity and start to think about normalizing experiences for all users. You want to perhaps discover how to engage people that you want to reach that are kind of beyond, your personas and user base, and how to do so equitably. And you want to ask, who might you be excluding? And so I had to get a Shonda Rhimes quote in. I first read this in Technically Wrong, which is Sarah Wachter-Becher's book. And in this quote, Shonda Rhimes says she doesn't like the word diversity, which kind of made me kind of bring my head to the side when I first read that. But then she says she instead prefers to say that she is normalizing television. She's making the world look normal because all of the characters and people and representation that she builds into her stories that she tells in her writer's room, well, those are the people that we encounter in our day-to-day lives. And so collectively, we all have the ability to introduce this concept of normalizing into our work. So that seat at the table at the kickoff or the, new product development table at the design sprint or in the brainstorming session, that seat that we fought so hard for content and design to occupy, that's where the work begins, not at the end, but at the beginning. And so I get that this work is hard, and I got you. There's a lot of words on this slide, but they're important. I'm not going to read them all to you. I'm just going to maybe suggest that take a gander at a site called How to Begin Designing for Diversity. It's a guide to help you get started in building equitable products, services, and content. And the authors Boyan Gao and Jahan Mantin suggest that you ask questions like the ones you see here that can help you identify and break down any biases that you or your team may have, with the goal of expanding your consideration beyond best case scenarios. Sometimes starting with the worst case can help you um, to get more in touch with things that might be holding you back from creating diverse and inclusive experiences. And so these questions and the ones that were on the previous slide, they provide examples of inquiries that you can make to help surface potential barriers that you and your product teams might have and may not have considered before. So in closing, I'm going to leave you with this quote from Verna Myers at the time she was at Netflix. And she says, diversity is being invited to the party and inclusion is being asked to dance. And I'd like to thank you. I am reachable at the Literati on Instagram and Twitter. There's a couple of links there where you can find me on LinkedIn. This little elephant guy on the right, I have a book, coming in. Rosenfeld Media. It's about building sustainable content strategy practices. If all goes well, we're going to press in a week. It'll be a while before it's printed, but I have a little code there that you can use for any other Rosenfeld Media books. And you can get 20% off if you're interested in that. There's plenty of other great titles that are out there. So thank you very much.
Awesome talk, Natalie. I think you can see all the emojis flying on screen right now, and people congratulating you in the chat. I really love how you brought sort of the learnings of accessibility from product into yoga, and then also flipped that and brought learnings from yoga into product. So yeah, just absolutely amazing. I'm going to check the Q&A real quick because I think we've got like a couple of minutes where we can get something in. I think they'll just be popping in shortly. I'll ask you a quick question if I might here.
All right.
So at what point did you start to realize the connection between accessibility and yoga and started put these two topics together?
I was working at an organization as a content strategy practice lead and realized that for the first time there was an entire team devoted to accessibility. Like everything that we did in our digital experiences had to go through that team, which was so exciting for me. At the same time, I was in my yoga teacher training, which, as I shared, was very, very purposely focused on accessibility. And I was listening to our accessibility partners at work talk about accessibility in the same way that we were talking about it in the yoga space. There was a happy accident that happened, though. I was giving a talk, locally, meetup talk, just before that time, probably about 5 months before, and my Twitter handles got mixed up. So they were tweeting about content strategy using my yoga handle, which they're kind of close.
Oh,
That's my
amazing.
bad. And we were able to correct it before we actually started to talk, but again, I started seeing where there was this overlap, and I was like, all right, this is good. I'm not going to try to separate those worlds. Let's bring them together. So this talk was kind of cooking for a little while, but once I came up with it, it's like, yeah, it just seemed like a natural fit.
Awesome. I mean, I love that happy accident there. That's wonderful. I think we've got a couple of questions in here. I think we've got time for maybe one before, maybe two, if we jump over to the next one. But let's see. How do you help ensure that accessibility allies or accessibility isn't an afterthought?
That's a question I get often, and sometimes there are not accessibility teams that our products and services have to go through, and it really starts with being advocates ourselves. It starts with maybe identifying language that's not as inclusive as it could be if you're coming from purely from a copy standpoint. It's in our images that we use, that we want to be able to not just throw a person of color or whatever into a situation that doesn't look natural, but just begin to think about, is everybody represented, right? And call it out, because I think what you'll find is that people really want to be inclusive, right? I think the hard work is asking the questions to realize, hey, maybe we haven't really been thinking about this purposefully, and saving it to the end, and only thinking about, accessibility as an afterthought, and not even thinking beyond to diversity and inclusion. All of those things matter, and representation for all users matters.
Absolutely. I love that. I think that's our time for now, unfortunately. But I saw that you shared your contact details, or at least the handles to get you on. There we go. There they are on
Yep.
screen. So if you do have a question that you had in the list, or maybe you haven't come up with a question yet, maybe just contact direct if that's all right.
Yeah, that'd be totally fine. I'd love to answer any questions.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much, Natalie. And
Thank you.
yeah, thanks for being at UX
Uh,
Live.
Thank you. Enjoy
We'll
the
see.
rest of the conference, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.
All right. Well, I think